What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be working on this large Japanese maple that I grew from a seedling. All right, let me give this a spin. And one of the earlier videos that I made maybe about a year and a half ago in early 2021 was doing some root work on this tree. So I had it ground growing for a couple of years, and then I dug it up and did some heavy root work and put it into this Anderson flat. The idea being that I don't want the roots to get too big from ground growing. So repeatedly digging it up and then ground growing it multiple times will get a better root flare on here than just like an individual session of growing for more years in the ground. But I'm not going to be working on the roots today. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is taking a look at the structure of the plant. So the trunk is getting to a pretty good size, but what I'm noticing is that there's not a whole lot of taper between the base of the trunk and the section basically up in here. So I'm going to take a look at what I've been using in order to create that bulk and kind of change things around a little bit. So really the first thing I want to do here is give myself a little bit of room to work, and kind of what I'm doing is getting back to distinguishing which parts of the tree are sacrifice branch and which parts are going to be part of the final product. And you know, that line might move, like I might train something to be a sacrifice branch, or I might train something to be a finished branch and then make it a sacrifice branch later, or just remove it entirely. But when I first pulled this out of the ground last winter, well, 18 months ago, say, it didn't have these branches, any branches on this side, and the sacrifice branch up here was kind of doing most of the bulking. But because it sent out nice shoots on this side of the tree, I now have the opportunity to kind of get a little bit more balanced branching. The other thing is that when I first created the movement in the trunk, I also wired some of the branches, and those branches have gotten bigger, which is great because they have movement and whatnot, but I'm not sure that I really like the movement. I don't think that it really matches the way that it should look, and so basically I have to figure out how to fix my mistake. But the first thing I'm going to do is just go through and do a little bit of branch thinning and elimination to give myself a better idea of what the structure of the tree is right now. So this is the wired part of the upper trunk, and this is a sacrifice branch, and it's been cut back before, but as a result of the cutback, it's got a lot of these side branches, and I want to keep these from shading out the parts of the tree that are below. So I'm going to go ahead and remove a bunch of these branches that have grown out last spring and this spring. All right, so this is about the front of the tree, and I've removed a large branch that was right here that was obviously not going to be useful. The sooner I remove it, the better, because then that can allow that scar to start healing. And now I have two branches back here that have been wired, one here and one up here. I'm not really liking either of them, because I don't feel like they really match the style of a maple, where I kind of want the branches to come up as they go out from the trunk, especially in the lower section. And then maybe as they get out towards the end, or towards the edges of the composition, they might go back down a little bit. But having them come out and down is more of a pine tree kind of style, and I feel like I'm not really sure what I was thinking when I wired those a number of years ago. And while I don't really want to remove them entirely, I'm not sure that I have a choice. So I'm going to start with this one. You can see it's got some pretty good size to it, but very little taper, which is similar to the issue with the trunk. So there's a small bud right here on the top of the branch, and then kind of right here is a branch that I could use to replace it with this shoot coming out. Everything else that's coming off is coming off on the after this downward sloping section, which really doesn't look very good. The other thing is that from what I'm currently thinking of as the front, this branch is coming out of sort of the interior of a curve / going towards the back. So I'm going to start by cutting it here and see what that leaves me with. Now if I go back over to the front here, I've got a lot less foliage in this area, because basically that's the branch that I cut off. So all that foliage that was in here is now gone. But I'm going to go further, and I'm going to take a look at this branch as well, because I really want to kind of cut this back and start training this to be a back branch, which will give some depth to the composition. But I also want to see what I can do in terms of the rest of these branches, because these branches that are up in here are a really good opportunity to get a more balanced composition, like a classical maple, typically the way that you see maples grown, Japanese maples anyway. So here's that lowest branch looking at it from the opposite side. This is what I would consider the back of the trunk, and again, just not ideal placement for the branch. And even though I have some nice movement in it that I wired in, there's really no taper here, and the branching has gotten too far out. So I'm going to start by cutting it here, and I very well might cut it all the way back into here, and just leaving the first inch or two of the branch as I go forward. With those big cuts done on the bottom, I'm going to move back into the crown up here, and as you can see, there's quite a bit going on, and let's kind of take a look and see if we can figure out what to do with the structure. All right, so as I get in here, I mean, the first thing is that hypothetically I'm using this as my top, so I should be trimming back all of these long shoots, or even pinching them rather than letting them run like this in the spring. Letting them run helps to build the amount of wood that's in the trunk, but it's not going to give me the fine branch structure that I really want. But the bigger issue here that I see is that this horizontal section is just too long and puts the top too far off to the left from where it should be for this tree. I really think the top should be coming back out of over here somewhere. In the middle of this, there's a kind of wired piece right here that I could turn into the top. So I'm going to take a look at that. So I'm going to start cutting this back, and I might actually even just cut it back all the way to here after I take a look with a few more of the shoots removed. After thinking about this for a little while longer, I've decided that I'm going to do, I'm having a really hard time using this as part of this composition because of how horizontal it is, how far off this direction it goes. So what I'm going to do, rather than just cutting this off and tossing it in the green bin, is to try an air layer on it somewhere in here. And then the same thing with this sacrifice branch. It's interesting, I think that propagation, the way that things are propagated, can really have an effect on the ultimate result. And I think if I take this and kind of air layer it, even though it looks incredibly ugly right now, if I continue working with that and it air layers successfully, that it might make an interesting base of a maple. So I'm going to give it a try. And I've never actually worked with something that quite that ugly before, but there's a lot of scars and deadwood in here. But the idea is to allow all of these things to keep running and making like a big base, which I believe will heal over, given that there are little channels of live tissue that can roll over these wounds. Got the bark stripped here and here, and now I'm going to go ahead and pack these with some sphagnum moss and wrap it in plastic. All right, so I've attached these two containers here, and I've layered a little bit of sphagnum moss on the bottom, followed by my propagation mix in the middle, and then more sphagnum moss on the top. And I'm going to put this in the greenhouse to encourage the root growth to start from these two layers. And the heat the extra heat in the greenhouse will encourage those roots to take off, just like a heat mat on cuttings or a freshly repotted tree really helps roots take off. So the hope here is that I end up with two separate trees. This is going to slow down the fattening of the portion of the tree below it, but I thought, why not get a little bit of practice in layering, as well as save this portion of the tree that is interesting but that I no longer want as part of the main composition. So with that all done, let's move on to looking at the primary branches that I'm actually going to keep. So at the moment, what I'm primarily interested in here is just the first node or two worth of length on the branches that I'm going to be keeping. Some of these are still a little bit on the small side to be wiring, so I'm going to give those a little bit more time. This one that's like coming out of the back of the tree here from the current front, I'm going to leave straight. I'm going to kind of use the wire to point and direct it straight up and outward. That's going to be a new sacrifice branch that I use to improve the taper. Basically, by moving the sacrifice branch down to here from up here, I'm going to reduce the the rate at which this increases in size while continuing to have the section below that branch increase in size. And so I'm hoping to improve the taper that way without creating any more scars on the trunk than is absolutely necessary. So I don't want to do a trunk chop here because I already have the movement that I want in the tree. And so this is going to be my alternate method for doing that. And it'll take 2, 3, 4 years for this branch running to make a significant impact on the size of the lower trunk down here. Other than that, I have just basically added some movement to keep these guys going in the directions that I think is best. I'm actually hoping for some buds down here on the lower trunk because this one's kind of coming out the back side here, and that may or may not happen before I remove the air layers that I added up above. I think once I do remove those air layers, then I should see more back budding on the lower trunk. As you might be able to tell from where I put the layers, what I think I've decided to do is to cut the main trunk back behind behind this sacrifice branch and behind this section back down into here to create a little bit less movement. I didn't like the fact that this was headed off that direction so much, so I'm going to focus on more of a traditional informal upright, and that means that the top will be more centered here over the base of the composition rather than heading off to the left. That's it for this time. Thanks everyone for watching. I will, in a couple of months, hopefully have an update on how these air layers are doing. And like I said, I'm going to be keeping this in the greenhouse to push it along as quickly as possible. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.